since 2010. The 2017 data shows us that businesses have grown. Looking at the individual restaurants, some have been shrunk, some he's absorbed additional space next door and added in additional dining area. And overall, the rental valuation has gone from £5.5 million to 7.2, almost £2 million additional value there in terms of the cost to him that he has to cover. And the rates, because rates are quite a substantial portion of rent, has gone up by almost £1 million. The staff at the moment, we're working on very old data, but roughly pay has remained flat over the last 5-6 years in the UK. And so his break-even has gone from 92 million to 97 million, a difference of almost £5 million. Now, remember, he gave us a number. He said it takes 3,000 diners on average per restaurant. And if you add that up, we can get what should people spend if they're there for it to be worth it for him and break-even level. And that's about £16 per person per meal. And that's essentially a meal plus a drink. And over the 2017 valuation, which has raised rates quite substantially, we're looking at an 80p increase per meal, which doesn't sound like an awful lot. But if you're not making it, you're not making it. You know, £16.50 is not good enough if what you need is the extra 30p. And what I then calculated was an attempt to try and figure out what is the efficiency that you expect from a business. On average, we're also looking at the closing businesses here, where I pulled it out. They're much smaller. You go from a 579 square meter average to a 255 square meter average. The rentals are lower, obviously, but they're much smaller businesses and their efficiency seems to be slightly less. So the average business requires about 5.2 diners per meter, and the closing businesses require about 5.6. The variation is quite large across the businesses, from about 3.5, which one would say would be a sparsely occupied restaurant, to about 9.4, which means you're turning tables very, very quickly. And those sorts of businesses there can appear busy, but they might not necessarily be busy. So if we look at a chart of this is a scatter plot here looking at the rent to those diners per square meter, we can see in red the ones that are closing. This one is a real outlier here. It's really high in terms of the number of diners per square meter, but the rental is fairly low. These are an outlier here in terms of the rental being extremely low. And so we can play around with this a little bit, and we can say maybe let's look at the staff pay and see what that does. And here we're still seeing that this is this weird outlier. It seems to be an expensive business to run for some reason. If we look at the floor area, we can suddenly see as well, it's still up there being an outlier. Overall, when we go through the data, you can start to get a sense of where and why. It turns out that a lot of the London businesses have these very high requirements for floor area, diner density. Trying to get an understanding of what that means, you know, looking at this as the overview, is that essentially we have a business. It can be a very, very densely occupied business, meaning that there are people queuing out the door to get in. But that's not all day long, and that's not every day. It just happens to be that at certain times you can't get into your favorite restaurant. But because they can't fill more tables than they actually have, and they're not able to distribute that demand evenly, even though there is a lot of demand, even though it's always busy when you're there, it may still be too expensive to run. And that appears to have been what happens in his Ludgate shops. With some of the other businesses, they're just not making enough people visiting at any time. And so he's not able to smooth out. Now, this is just useful for us to have a look at and get a sense of the variation across his chain. And I will link this data so that you can play around with yourself in a Google spreadsheet. Did we need him to tell us that he had 3,000 diners? Well, yeah. For one thing, it helps us with a sanity check. I said, £16, and you're going, well, £16 in a restaurant, Jamie Italian. that sounds like probably what you spend. Could we have figured it out ourselves? Well, you know what? We could actually have done that. If we go back into the Jamie's website, you'll see that the restaurant menus for every single restaurant in every single location, we have them. And what you'll note is that the average meal, you're going to be spending from 10 all the way up to 15, 22 pounds. A pasta meal, you can spend less, you can spend, depending if it's a half portion, but again, you're spending about 10 pounds. And if we look at drinks, you're also looking at something there about 6 pounds. So recognizing that a fair number of people will go in and have a restaurant meal and basically decide that they're going to only drink water, that's fine. On average, he needs to make his 16 pounds. If I was calculating this, and I have all of the other data from Picaya, which is data that we already have, it's open data, essentially, which means that you could, with a little bit of effort, duplicate what I've done in Picaya, or you could just log in there yourself. And we do have subscription systems and services available to people. But you could actually work out from break even, looking at the type of business it is and looking at the menu of different types of businesses that are similar to that nearby, what sort of numbers you need. I would have looked at Jamie's menu and I would have just sort of rounded off. I would have said, well, it's about 10 pounds for a main meal, about 5 pounds for a drink. If the person has one main meal and one drink, 15 pounds. And I would have then taken a break even and divide by the 15 and just give you a number of patrons that you need on a daily or a weekly basis to basically tell you what you need to do and give you a target. What Jamie's number of 3,000 does is allows me to work the other way and see what his expectation is. As long as those numbers are reasonably close together, that's really useful. That means that I can basically be comfortable with my methodology and my assessments. So that's a very rough and quick look at how we can try and figure out what is happening in a business and how other people's decisions, in this case potentially a legitimate business decision to close down his 6 businesses and to concentrate on the ones that are doing better, can be interesting for us and teach us some things. It also shows us how something like the new ratings change across the UK, which is going to lead to quite a lot of much higher tax fees for different businesses, could push a lot of businesses to the wall. Someone like Jamie Oliver, who's a very experienced restaurateur, is looking ahead. These taxes have not been introduced yet, but they will be in the next few months. And he's already figuring out that while his businesses are still making money, he better make some changes. Before the requirement for spend goes up 80p, and he knows it's just not going to happen. And there's a lot of business owners that are not doing that. You're not looking ahead into what these changes might mean for your business. And the first time you find out what is going to happen might be when you get your next tax bill. So hopefully you learned something, and hopefully it was interesting to you. And well, I'll be back to my coffee, and we'll see.